Okay, chapter 4 of the Elements book is about revision. And most of our students feel like, what? I have to revise? Are you crazy? The first two sections of this chapter, undergraduate visions of writing and two kinds of revision, are really good discussions of student attitudes toward revision, how they feel and why they feel the way they do. Most students want to say, I've done this paper, I'm finished with it. Why do I have to go back and change it? The chapter in our Elements book calls this delaying the point of solidification, which I think that's a funny way to put it. But after you've read these two sections, and you've considered all the reasons students tend to think of the first draft as good and solid and finished, which one of those reasons resonates most with you? And maybe even how you wrote as an undergraduate or how you wrote now. If you would write that down so we can discuss it on Saturday. The next two sections make an important point that goes well with some of the other things we've talked about. On page 66, the section talks about trying to get the students to revise before you actually call it a draft. How that would fit in with what we've said is you want them to do a whole lot more writing and revising in the pre-writing stage, in the idea generation and kicking things around stage. Get them to do revision in that area before you call it a draft, and then maybe they won't feel like it's the finished product that they're changing. For this first section, the one about revise before you call it a draft, think about your process writing assignment and write down two specific opportunities for revision that you can put in your assignment before you ask for a first draft. Pencil those in so we can talk about them on Saturday. The second idea on how to get them to revise starts on page 68, and that's what the section that's called revise after you call it a draft. There's three ideas on page 68. No, I'm sorry. 4 ideas, 4 strategies for eliciting revisions of drafts. After you've read this little section, could you please identify in your writing assignment, your process writing assignment, the best spot to require from your students a written revision plan? It wouldn't have to be long, just, 3 things that they're going to change. What's the best place for you to ask for that? Please mark that and let me know on Saturday. The next section, the one that starts on the bottom of page 68, is called Responding to Drafts for Revision. And I wrote response, response, response here because that's what we talked about last chapter. How important your response is, how you want to, you also want to postpone that judgment. Just like you want your students to postpone feeling like the paper is finished, you're going to need to postpone your judgment as long as possible. So here's a chance for us to put that idea to work, how your responses will inspire revision as opposed to having students shut down. So after you read this section, and please read it very carefully, try to pick 4 of the 7 strategies that they give on pages 70 and 71. Pick 4 of those and write an end comment that fits what the authors say here. Try to make it an end comment that would fit one of your assignments, but what you're going to have to do is imagine typical writing that you get from your students and writing an end comment that would be for that imaginary paper. But remember, you're not the only responder. The first group of responders, other than you, are the classmates. It's a type of peer response. Pages 72 through the end of the chapter talk about how to use peer response effectively. Now, I've probably said this before. I think effective peer response is very hard for very many reasons. Our authors say on page 73 of the chapter that the value of peer response depends on the way you structure and supervise the activity. We'll spend a lot of time in our training going over effective peer review. But for right now, read these pages in this chapter and then write one paragraph about how you feel peer response will work best in your class. You might also want to go back to that process writing chapter I scanned and emailed to you before our training dates in May. There's a long, thorough section on peer review that starts on page 49 of that chapter. Another form of peer response is the Writing Center consultants. They don't talk about this in this chapter, but I have to mention it here because it fits in with peer response. You're going to want to fit in as often as possible required to sessions at the Writing Center with the Writing Center consultants. We're going to talk about that in more detail too, because there are ways that you can maximize, the effectiveness of that. But I just wanted to mention it here. Also, there's one section in this chapter that I didn't mention at all. Can you tell me what that is? See you Saturday.